Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
In mouth rehabilitation, we are confronted with many teeth that require restorations. It is most profitable to the dentist and the patient to prepare these teeth in a minimum length of time and with a minimum amount of trauma to the patient. Therefore, it is better and more efficient to plan and execute preparations on a multiple basis, where each tooth is related to a segment of teeth, rather than to prepare each tooth with a stereotype preparation in mind and try to adapt the preparation whether or not it satisfies the situation. Multiple preparations involve the principles and steps involved in making a segment of restorations at a time, with the modifications to satisfy the needs of the individual teeth. To do this, the dentist should know the principles and steps and possible modifications. Each step in multiple preparation consists of one or more of the four elements of tooth preparation. The four elements of tooth preparation are: 1. Occlusal or incisal reduction, to make space for the new occlusion and to provide adequate resistance form. 2. The axial reduction, to permit placement of a restoration and to provide retention and resistance form. Number 3. The retention and resistance form, to retain the restoration and keep the retentive part in place. Number 4. The margins that unite the restoration with the tooth and make the restoration compatible with the tooth and the gingival tissue. In multiple preparations, the idea is to use as few burrs as possible and to use each burr to its fullest extent before changing the burr. Changing burrs wastes time. During this procedure, we will use 3 basic burrs. The preparations are crowns with beveled shoulders. The first burr to use is a fast-cutting burr such as a diamond. It should be tapered to give the near parallel surfaces with 2 to 5 degrees taper. The end of the burr is rounded or square. The rough, fast-cutting diamond is used so that we can get rid of tooth structure rapidly in the occlusal and axial reduction. The diamond leaves rough surfaces, so we need to follow the diamond with a burr with smooth cutting edges. A small carbide burr that cuts smooth would be used on all surfaces cut by the diamond. This burr can also be used to make grooves for retention. The final burr for this preparation series is a flame-shaped, smooth-cutting burr that can be used to place the bevel into the gingival sulcus. Here we have a large flame-shaped burr. The large flame-shaped burr held vertically will give the right size of the bevel. The bevel is a heavy bevel. The occlusal reduction can be partial or complete occlusal coverage. The occlusal reduction, a uniform functional reduction in harmony with the ridge and groove direction, is done. About 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters of reduction is required. From the oral examination and the diagnostic wax-up, we determine the occlusal surfaces that need to be involved. We determine the cusp and fossa placement on the diagnostic wax-up. We determine where the cusps should go, the fossas should go, because the cusps determine the ridge and groove direction. We need to know the ridge and groove direction so that we can make the reductions where we need the grooves in the restorations. Therefore, the occlusal reduction should not be flat, but should resemble the original occlusal form. The purpose of the occlusal reduction is to make space for the new occlusion and to make space for the thickness of material for the resistance form. Now, a convenient way to do this is to notch the depth that you want to cut, taking a half a cusp off at a time. This type of a cut provides a depth gauge for how much occlusal reduction we've done. We want to take about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters of occlusal surface off of the tooth. As you can see here, I left part of this buccal cusp. That lets me know that I have taken away that much tooth. A little bit of air in that area, please. As you can see here, here's our depth cut to tell us that we've taken away that much tooth. Then we can go ahead with the other half of that buccal cusp. Where a groove should be, we would like to put a groove back in the preparation. The grooves are important. If you want to put a groove in the finished casting and you don't have one in the preparation, this is generally an area of where you will go through the casting when you try to finish it. So from your diagnostic wax-up, determine where the ridge and grooves should be, and then make grooves actually in your preparation. So we'll go back down the 3 teeth, doing the occlusal reduction, buccal occlusal reduction on all 3 of the teeth. This can be done fairly fast. With a new diamond or a sharp diamond, we can go ahead and remove this tooth surface fairly fast. We would now go down and reduce all the lingual cusps. Again, using a depth cut so that you can gauge how much tooth structure you've taken away. We say we'd like about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters of functional clearance. This means that in all the movements, working, balancing, and protrusive, we would have just 2 millimeters of reduction. Again, we would cut or remove the tooth structure from all 3 teeth while we have this position. We can conveniently, with this same chair position, same head position, go back and reduce all of these lingual surfaces. We now have the finished roughed out lingual reduction. To check to see that we have the proper amount of clearance, we have the patient close and go into the working and balancing movements. Go way over to that side, way back to this side. Now come out in protrusive, out on your front teeth. Okay, we have the proper amount of clearance in all the movements. Open, please. Now, we go down the occlusal reduction. What we've done is to reduce a uniform amount of about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters. You shorten the cusps 1.5 millimeters. You also deepen the fossa and the grooves about 1.5 millimeters, so that you have maintained the grooves in the teeth, as you can see here. We reduced the cusps and the grooves the same amount. So the occlusal reduction is a uniform amount of occlusal reduction. The axial reduction extends from the occlusal reduction towards the gingival tissue. The axial reduction ends at the crest of the gingival tissue. The number of axial surface to involve and the extension of the axial surface comes from the oral examination, the diagnostic wax-up, and the amount of retention and resistance form needed. From the oral exam, we determine the axial surfaces to be involved due to the carious lesions, the existing restorations, the aesthetic requirements, a need to rebuild the contours, and a need for retention. In this case, we have many cervical restorations and carious lesions, so all of the axial surfaces need to be involved. From the diagnostic wax-up, we determine also the axial surfaces to be involved. We may need to involve an axial surface if a cusp needs to be moved buccal or lingually into occlusion. A wax-up of the occlusion indicates the axial surfaces to be involved in restoring the occlusion. In this patient, because of the occlusion and the existing carious lesions and restorations and the aesthetics, all of the axial surfaces need to be involved. The purpose of the axial reduction is to remove tooth undercuts and to make it possible for a rigid casting. It extends from the occlusal reduction towards the gingival tissue and ends in a margin. It can provide for retention with near parallel walls of about 2 to 5 degrees taper and resistance form by adding bulk to the casting and the margin. It follows the tooth form, and frequently 2 planes are needed. It also establishes the path of draw for bridges and splints. Here again, you can use a depth cut, reducing a half of the buccal surface of the tooth. You can see here now we've taken off about the normal amount of tooth that we would like. These are going to be Ceramco restorations, so we'd want about 1.5 mm reduction to give us an adequate thickness for our gold and our porcelain. We carry the margin where we have an existing restoration. We carry the margin for the crown that we're going to make so that it is down below or subgingivally to the existing restoration. We want to have our margin for our crown on natural tooth structure. There are 4 basic types of margin that the axial surface can end in: the shoulderless, the chamfer, the shoulder, and the beveled shoulder. In this case, we will use the beveled shoulder. After we have the buccal reduction, the mesial part, we go ahead and do the distal part of the buccal reduction. We'll actually at this stage wind up with a kind of a chamfer around the margin of our preparation. We take the burr and go between the teeth. We open this area the same as you would for a disc. Keep a stream of water on there, would you please? By the time we've done our buccal reduction, most of the existing restoration will be gone. If we have no restoration or no existing restoration on the buccal, We would like to end our finish line at this stage of the preparation at the crest of the gingival tissue. If we elect to take the margin under the gingival tissue, we will do it with our finishing burr in the final stages. All surfaces where they meet, it's well to have a rounded area rather than a sharp angle. We now have completed the gross reduction for our lingual surfaces. You can see here the finish line finishes or ends just at the crest of the gingival tissue. We will take that finish line under the gingival tissue with a flamed finishing burr. You can see on the proximal area where I had to go down under the tissue to get below the existing restoration. You tear up the tissue a little bit, you can see this hemorrhage area here. So it's easier and nicer and kinder to the tissue if we take it down underneath the gingival tissue with something of a little less coarse nature. The diamond is a very rough burr. As you can see here on the molar again, the shoulder that we've established around the tooth, this doesn't have to be the same width all the way around the tooth. On the proximal and lingual area where it's going to be gold, we would need less shoulder. On the buccal area where we're going to have porcelain and gold, we would need a thicker shoulder. So the width of the shoulder varies around the tooth. The contour of the shoulder in relationship to the tissue varies around the tooth. So now we have grossed out in our preparation the occlusal reduction, the axial reduction. We would now switch over to our smooth cutting burr, steel burr, and go over these surfaces, making them as smooth and as accurate as possible. As you can see with this burr on the existing amalgam restorations, how smooth we can get these surfaces with this burr. We're not actually cutting a lot of tooth structure as much as we are just taking out the grooves left by the rough cutting diamond. One might wonder why not start with a steel burr if you're going to want smooth surfaces. You can, if you would like, start the preparation with this burr and do the entire reduction up to this point. But in most instances, the diamond cuts much faster than the carbide burr. Retention is the property of a preparation that holds the restoration in place and places the cement under compression. The resistance form is the design of the preparation to give strength to the casting, margins, and retention. Retention comes from four basic forms: opposing axial walls of 2 to 5 degrees taper, boxes, grooves, and pins. Retention can come from opposing axial walls of 2 to 5 degrees taper. These can be either external, as we have in this preparation, or internal opposing walls, as we have in this preparation. The opposing internal walls give us our retention. Boxes have internal opposing axial walls also. Boxes are used where old restorations exist or space is needed for precision attachment or stress breakers. Retention can also come from axial grooves. Axial grooves can be placed on any of the axial surfaces. The use of axial grooves conserves more tooth structure. They are placed for convenience, aesthetics, ease of finishing, and to withstand forces of occlusion. The typical axial groove is placed on the mesial distal to counteract occlusal forces in the buccal lingual direction. Grooves can also be placed in the buccal and lingual axial surfaces to counteract forces due to the tilted abutment tooth or bending action of the bridge, as we have in this preparation. Pins can be used for retentions. Pins can either be tapered or parallel. The use of pins results in less tooth reduction and less axial involvement. As you see here, we've involved only 2/3 of the lingual surfaces and 1 proximal area. It can be a more conservative type of retention. However, too much conservatism can lead to a lack of retention and a lack of resistance form that can lead to the failure of the restoration. We have now gone over all of the cut surfaces with our carbide burr with a smooth cutting surface, and we have made the surfaces as smooth as we can all the way around the tooth. We have emphasized the grooves in our occlusal surface. We could also, at this stage of the game, with this burr, start putting in some of our retention form. If we would like to use a buccal groove, we could do that at this stage with this same burr. Buccal and lingual grooves add to the retention of our restoration. We have a short preparation. We could use a buccal and lingual groove or a mesial and distal groove to give us added retention. With 3 individual restorations as we have here, we need very little auxiliary retention other than the tapered or near parallel walls that we have around the tooth. Resistance form is the property of a restoration to resist bending. Occlusal bars between grooves and proximal boxes give resistance and strength to the retention. The significance of the resistance form of the bar is in its dimension. If we double the width, we increase the resistance form 2 times. However, if we kept the width the same and doubled the thickness, we would increase the strength 8 times. Therefore, the ideal resistance form is narrow and deep. Margins also need resistance form. They need bulk at the margins to prevent stress concentrations. Concentrations of stress at the margins can cause a bending and a breakage of the cement bond, and this would permit leakage of saliva. Cement has strength under compression, not tension. Therefore, if a margin bends, the cement bond can be broken. The purposes of margins are to prevent leakage of saliva and subsequent caries and be compatible with the adjacent tissue. Margins are best placed for ease of finish, patient maintenance, and future checkups. Margins are best placed above the crest of the gingival tissue. However, there are indications for placing margins into the gingival crevice. The indications for placing margins into the gingival sulcus are because of existing restorations that extend into the gingival sulcus, because of carious lesions that extend into the gingival sulcus, to obtain additional retention, length for retention, and for aesthetics to hide the margins and gold in the gingival sulcus. A single preparation may be a blend of one or more of the 4 basic types of margin throughout the preparation. The type of margin to use is based on the stress concentration and the resistance form. the direction of the enamel rods, the ease of preparation and finishing, the ease of impression making and waxing, the ease of casting, the type of restorative material being used, either gold, porcelain fused to gold, and so on. There are 4 basic types of margins. The shoulderless is the least demanding in preparation and fitting, but it lacks resistance form at the margin. The chamfer is a transition between the shoulderless and the shoulder preparation. It is a concave or rounded bevel. The shoulder margin is a butt joint and is the most difficult to fit. It is the strongest with the most bulk at the margin, thereby giving the most resistance to stress. The angle shoulder is frequently used in the maxillary anterior teeth where ascetics is involved, and a porcelain margin can be used. The bevel shoulder has the properties of the shoulderless preparation in ease of preparation and finishing, plus bulk at the margin for the resistance to stress. The bevel shoulder can be used in the posterior area or where ascetics is not involved. The bevel shoulder will be used in this demonstration. Up to this point, we have kept the margins about the level of the crest of the gingival tissue. We have ended the margin where the restoration and whole restoration does not exist, right at the crest of the gingival tissue. We now want to, in this stage of the preparation, refine the margins and also take the margin under the gingival tissue, or take it into the depth of the sulcus, the amount that we would like. How far you take it into the depth of the sulcus still is a controversial subject. Some people like to say a half of the depth of the sulcus. Some people like to say to the bottom of the sulcus. But I think consideration should be given on how far you take the preparation into the sulcus and the difficulty that you would have in securing an impression. You've got to reflect the tissue, get the tissue packed back in order to take the impression. So if you had the preparation extending to the bottom of the sulcus, you would have a very difficult time to take an impression. So what I'm going to do is to attempt to put the preparation, finish the preparation about half the depth of the sulcus. I don't want to traumatize the tissue, so at this stage I want to pack the tissue, reflect the tissue back so that I can extend the bevel into the sulcus. As you see here, we're going to use a shoulder with a long bevel. We have established our shoulder, the width of our shoulder, and now we're going to just bevel this shoulder, and that part will go into the gingival tissue. The axial reduction has ended in the shoulder at the crest of the gingival tissue to protect the gingival tissue. We will now use the retraction cord to displace the tissue so that the bevel can be placed into the gingival sulcus without trauma to the tissue. The retraction cord is left in place from 2 to 5 minutes. After the tissue is retracted sufficiently, the retraction cord is removed. With the tissue adequately reflected, the bevel portion of the margin can be prepared into the gingival sulcus using the flame finishing burr with a minimum amount of trauma to the tissue. Material we're using here is Gingipack. I find it easier to pack the tissue if I've got the sulcus dry and the pack dry. The problem with packing tissue is the getting hemorrhage or saliva into the sulcus. Then it becomes very slippery, and the Gingipack has a difficult time staying in the sulcus. As you pack one area, you would find it coming out in the other area. The instrument used for packing the tissue is any convenient blunt instrument. This is kind of like a broad, blunt end. This is a stellite instrument, and it serves the purpose of stuffing the Gingipack down in the tissue. The thing that you want to do is to stuff it right next to the tooth and kind of roll the pack material into the sulcus. As I say, if you've got a lot of hemorrhage or if you've got the area swamped with saliva, you're not going to get the pack into the tissue. But as you see here, with the tissue dry, with the cord dry, it goes into the sulcus rather easily. Now this first packing, we would want to just reflect the tissue enough for us to get the tissue back out of the road to make our bevels. Some of the difficulties in making preparations on teeth with existing restorations is the fact that the restoration is down near the bottom of the sulcus. And if we try to get the preparation below the existing restoration, then we're going to be down pretty close to the bottom of the sulcus as we are here. You must keep the area relatively dry, free of saliva, but as you notice there, every time the patient swallows, the tongue has a tendency to come up and moisten the area. But you want to keep the whole area as dry as you can. But as you see, the pack material can be placed down in the sulcus very easily if the conditions are right. If the tissue is quite hemorrhagic and you're having trouble controlling the hemorrhage, you're better off placing the temporaries in the mouth, waiting a week, and then coming back and doing the final preparations. Is this what we did in this situation? Is we went ahead, prepared the teeth with the shoulder to the crest of the gingival tissue, made our temporaries. We had the patient wear the temporaries for a week between filmings, and this allowed the tissue to heal. Once the pack is in position, we lubricate this or soak it with hemident liquid and allow this to stay in place for 2 to 3 minutes. We have the gingipack down in the sulcus, and we have it soaking with hemident liquid. You can see that the gingipack is in the depth of the sulcus, and we've left it in there for 2 to 3 minutes. And now we're going to remove this and take our margins, finish our margins into the sulcus. As you can see, as we remove the pack, the tissue is reflected away from the margins a bit to allow us to refine these margins without traumatizing the tissue. So now we will go around, open time, go around the tooth and make a long bevel, taking away about half the width of the shoulder as we put the bevel into the sulcus. The shoulder with the bevel again gives us the shoulder, which gives us our maximum resistance form, and the bevel gives us a nice margin for finishing. As you can see, we can go down in the sulcus area and do this margin without traumatizing the tissue. This is why we would use the flame-shaped finishing burrs rather than a diamond. A diamond is very rough, and you would lacerate the tissue quite severely, and then you'd have a hemorrhage problem to contend with. We can take this down in the sulcus very nicely without traumatizing the tissue. The bevel portion of the preparation has been taken into the gingival sulcus. As you see here, this has been accomplished with the minimum amount of trauma to the soft tissue. The tissue can now be repacked lightly to make ready for the impression. The need to make multiple preparations need not handicap the successful restoration in mouth rehabilitation. With the proper oral exam, diagnostic workup, treatment plan, and plan of treatment, a complete mouth of teeth can be prepared using a minimum amount of time and effort, using a few burrs and avoiding duplication, with a minimum amount of trauma to the teeth, the patient, and the dentist. The use of the four elements of tooth preparation, occlusal reduction, axial reduction, retention and resistance reform, and margins have been presented.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.